Marcus Thompson adjusted his worn baseball cap and walked through the entrance of Precision Shooting Sports, a popular civilian gun range on the outskirts of Denver. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot filled with pickup trucks and SUVs. He carried a simple black rifle case, nothing fancy or expensive looking, just a basic protective case that had seen better days. The range was busy with weekend shooters, families teaching their teenagers proper gun safety, hunters preparing for the upcoming season, and competitive shooters fine-tuning their skills. The air buzzed with conversation about the latest firearms, modifications, and shooting techniques. Marcus quietly signed in at the front desk, paid his range fee, and requested lane 15 at the far end as he unpacked his rifle. Several shooters nearby couldn't help but notice his equipment. The rifle appeared to be a standard hunting rifle. Nothing that would catch anyone's attention at first glance. No expensive scope, no custom modifications, no flashy accessories that usually drew admiration from other shooters. It looked like something someone might buy at a local sporting goods store. "That's an interesting choice," commented Jake Morrison, a local competitive shooter who frequented the range. Jake had thousands of dollars invested in his custom precision rifle, complete with a high-end scope and specialized ammunition. He gestured toward Marcus's simple setup with a slight smirk, all planning to do some hunting this season. Marcus nodded politely, continuing to set up his shooting position. "Something like that," he replied quietly, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. He moved with deliberate precision, checking his rifle methodically, but without any show or fanfare. Other shooters began to take notice of the newcomer. Word spread quickly in the small community of regular range visitors. Someone new always generated curiosity, especially when their equipment seemed so basic compared to the expensive gear most serious shooters preferred. $5 says he can't hit the broadside of a barn with that setup," whispered Tony Ritchie. To his shooting partner, Tony owned a local gun shop and considered himself an expert on firearms and shooting capabilities. He had seen countless wannabe marksmen come through his store with unrealistic expectations about their abilities. The range safety officer announced that the range was hot. Shooters could begin firing. Marcus positioned himself at his lane, assumed a comfortable prone position, and began to study the 100-yard target through his modest scope. His breathing became controlled and rhythmic, practice so ingrained it was automatic. The other shooters continued their conversations, occasionally glancing over at Marcus with barely concealed amusement. They had seen plenty of overconfident shooters who thought they could achieve precision results with basic equipment. Most struggled to achieve decent groupings even at close range. Marcus chambered around and settled into his shooting position. The range filled with the familiar sounds of various firearms, from small-caliber rifles to powerful hunting rifles. The cacophony of different weapons created a symphony familiar to anyone who spent time at shooting ranges. What the other shooters didn't know was that Marcus had spent the last 15 years perfecting his craft in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. He had made shots that others would consider impossible, under conditions that would break most people's concentration. The simple rifle in his hands was nearly identical to weapons he had used in operations across 3 continents. The muscle memory was there, bedded so deeply that civilian shooting felt almost effortless. Every breath, every heartbeat, every micro-adjustment was calculated with precision that came from years of life or death. Situations where missing meant failure of the mission and potential loss of teammates. As Marcus prepared for his first shot, he could hear the continued chatter from nearby lanes. The other shooters were discussing their expensive equipment, comparing notes on ammunition costs, and sharing stories about their best shooting performances. None of them paid serious attention to the quiet man at lane 15 who was about to demonstrate what real precision looked like. The afternoon was about to become very educational for everyone present. The crack of Marcus's rifle cut through the range noise with a distinctive sound that made several experienced shooters pause mid-conversation. There was something different about it, a precision in the timing that suggested complete control. Rather than rushed shooting through his spotting scope, Jake Morrison watched Marcus's target at the 100-yard line. He expected to see a wild miss or maybe a lucky hit somewhere on the paper. Instead, he found himself staring at a perfect bullseye hit, dead center of the target. Jake blinked and looked again, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. "Beginner's luck," Tony Ritchie muttered, though his voice carried less confidence than before. He had witnessed thousands of shooters over the years, and something about Marcus's shooting stance and follow-through suggested this was no accident. Marcus worked the bolt of his rifle smoothly, ejecting the spent casing and chambering. Another round. His movements were economical and practiced, wasting no motion or time. He settled back into position and fired again within 30 seconds of his first shot. The second bullet struck within a quarter-inch of the first, creating what experienced shooters call a touching group. The murmurs along the firing line began to quiet as more people noticed what was happening at lane 15. "That's gotta be modified ammunition," suggested Lisa Chen, a competitive shooter who had won several regional championships. She lowered her own rifle and pulled out binoculars to get a better look at Marcus's target. Nobody shoots groups like that with factory ammunition. Marcus continued his methodical approach, firing a third shot that completed a triangle so tight it could be covered with a quarter. The range had grown noticeably quieter as shooters became more interested in watching the mysterious newcomer than focusing on their own shooting. Range safety. Officer Mike Patterson had been working at Precision Shooting Sports for 12 years. He had seen exceptional shooting before, but something about Marcus's technique caught his professional attention. The way Marcus controlled his breathing, the consistency of his shooting position, and the absolute stillness between shots suggested military training of the highest level. "Excuse me," Mike approached Marcus during a ceasefire period when all shooting stopped for target changes. "That's some impressive shooting. Mind if I ask about your background?" Marcus looked up from cleaning his rifle barrel with a simple cleaning rod. "It's like to shoot straight," he replied with the same quiet demeanor he had maintained since arriving, learned from some good instructors over the years. The other shooters gathered closer, their initial skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. Jake Morrison approached with his expensive spotting scope. "Would you mind if I took a closer look at your target? That grouping is tournament-level precision." Marcus nodded and continued his rifle maintenance while Jake set up his spotting scope. Through the high-powered optic, the target revealed 3 bullet holes clustered so tightly they appeared to be a single ragged hole slightly larger than the individual bullet diameter. "This is extraordinary," Jake announced to the growing crowd. "I've never seen shooting like this outside of professional competitions. What kind of training did you have?" The question hung in the air as Marcus finished cleaning his rifle. He looked around at the expectant faces, all waiting for an explanation that would make sense of what they had witnessed. These were serious shooters who understood the difficulty of achieving such precision, especially with basic equipment. Marcus stood up and walked to the 200-yard target line, carrying a fresh target. The crowd watched as he clipped it to the target frame and returned to his shooting position. 200 yards was considered long-range shooting for most civilian shooters, requiring significantly more skill to achieve accurate results. "He's going to try 200 yards, someone whispered. "That basic scope, he'll be lucky to hit the target at all." Marcus settled into position again, this time taking slightly longer to study the wind conditions and environmental factors. Gentle breeze was moving from left to right across the range, requiring compensation that would challenge even experienced long-range shooters. The anticipation was building among the spectators. They had just witnessed extraordinary precision at 100 yards. But 200 yards would be the real test of Marcus's abilities. Distance amplified every small error in shooting technique, turning minor mistakes into major misses. As Marcus prepared for his first shot at the longer distance, none of the watching shooters could imagine the countless hours he had spent engaging targets at distances that would seem impossible to civilian marksmen. In his world, 200 yards was considered close range. The first shot at 200 yards echoed across the range with the same controlled precision as before. Marcus remained in position for several seconds after firing, following through completely before working the bolt. This extended follow-through was something most civilian shooters never learned, but it was fundamental to achieving consistent accuracy at longer distances. Jake Morrison immediately focused his spotting scope on the distant target. The crowd gathered behind him, waiting for his assessment. After a long moment of adjustment and careful observation, Jake's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Dead center bullseye," he announced. "Perfect hit at 200 yards. The murmurs around the firing line grew louder. Several shooters pulled out their own binoculars and spotting scopes to confirm what Jake was seeing. The target showed a clean hole precisely in the center of the bullseye. Exactly where a competition-level marksman would aim. That has to be the rifle, Tony Ricci insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "There's something special about that weapon system that we're not seeing." Marcus fired his second shot at 200 yards, maintaining the same deliberate pace and consistent technique. The bullet impact was visible through the scopes as another perfect hit. It's positioned within millimeters of the first shot. Lisa Chen shook her head in amazement. "I've been shooting competitively for 8 years, and I've never seen precision like this. Even with my custom rifle and hand-loaded ammunition, I couldn't achieve those groups consistently." The third shot completed another impossibly tight group at 200 yards. The cluster of bullet holes could be covered with a nickel, representing shooting precision that defied the capabilities of the basic equipment Marcus was using. Range Safety Officer Mike Patterson approached Marcus again during the next ceasefire period. His curiosity had evolved into professional respect, tinged with suspicion that there was much more to this quiet shooter than met the eye. "Sir, I have to ask directly," Mike said. "Are you military or law enforcement? That level of marksmanship doesn't develop through casual shooting." Marcus looked up from reloading his magazine with the same methodical care he applied to everything else. "I've had some training," he replied simply, offering no additional details. The crowd had grown larger as word spread throughout the range facility. Shooters from other lanes had finished their sessions early to witness what many were calling the best civilian shooting they had ever seen. The pro shop staff had also gathered, along with several customers who had been browsing equipment. "What's your secret?" asked David Kumar, a police sniper who trained at the range regularly. "I work with tactical teams, and even our best shooters would struggle to match what you're doing with basic equipment." Marcus stood and walked to the 300-yard target line, carrying another fresh target. The crowd followed his movement with growing anticipation and amazement. 300 yards represented serious long-range shooting that challenged even experienced marksmen with premium equipment. "He's not really going to try 300 yards, someone whispered. The wind conditions alone would make that shot nearly impossible. With that scope, the wind had picked up slightly, creating visible movement in the grass between the firing line and the distant targets. Reading wind conditions at 300 yards required experience and skill that took years to develop. Most recreational shooters avoided attempting precision shots at such distances because of the complexity involved. Marcus clipped his target to the 300-yard frame and returned to his shooting position. The walk back seemed longer now, with dozens of eyes following his every movement. Conversations had stopped completely as everyone focused on what appeared to be an impossible challenge. As Marcus settled into his shooting position for the third time, he could feel the weight of expectation from the watching crowd. They had witnessed 2 demonstrations of extraordinary marksmanship, and now they were about to see if lightning could strike 3 times. What none of them knew was that Marcus had made shots at 300 yards under combat conditions, with enemy forces actively trying to locate and eliminate him. It's the peaceful environment of the civilian shooting range, despite the pressure of having an audience. It was far less stressful than the situations where he had proven his abilities countless times before. The range fell completely silent as Marcus began his final demonstration. Marcus spent several minutes studying the wind conditions before settling into his final shooting position. At 300 yards, environmental factors became critical variables that could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss. He watched the grass, movement, felt the air currents on his face, calculated the adjustments needed for the crosswind. The entire range had fallen silent. Even shooters at other outdoor ranges often paused their activities when they heard about exceptional marksmanship being demonstrated nearby. Word had spread through social media, and several people were recording video on their phones, though they maintained respectful distance. Jake Morrison had positioned his spotting scope for the best possible view of the 300-yard target. His hands were slightly unsteady from anticipation as he focused the optics. He had competed in precision shooting for over a decade, and he understood exactly how difficult. Marcus was attempting to make this shot appear routine. Marcus's first shot at 300 yards took longer to execute than his previous demonstrations. He settled into position, acquired his sight picture, controlled his breathing, and then relaxed completely before starting the process again. This methodical approach was exactly what military snipers were trained to do when precision was absolutely critical. The rifle fired with the same controlled precision as before. Through his spotting scope, Jake Morrison searched the target carefully, expecting to see a miss, or at best a hit somewhere in the outer rings. Instead, he found himself staring at another center bullseye hit. "Perfect shot," Jake announced, his voice carrying a note of awe that silenced any remaining skeptics. Dead center at 300 yards, the crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, something rarely heard at shooting ranges. Even experienced marksmen recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Several people were shaking their heads in disbelief, unable to reconcile what they were seeing with their understanding of shooting capabilities. Marcus fired his second shot at 300 yards with the same deliberate technique. The bullet struck within a fraction of an inch from the first hit, creating what appeared to be a single, slightly enlarged hole in the center of the target. "This is impossible," Lisa Chen whispered to David Coomer. "I mean, it's happening, but it shouldn't be possible with that equipment at this distance." The third shot completed another impossibly tight group at 300 yards. Through multiple spotting scopes, the observers could see 3 bullet holes clustered so closely they formed what shooters call a one-hole group. The holy grail of precision. Shooting that most marksmen never achieve even once in their shooting careers. Range Safety Officer Mike Patterson had been making phone calls during the demonstration. As Marcus finished his shooting, Mike approached with a serious expression. That indicated his suspicions had been confirmed. "Colonel Thompson," Mike said quietly, using Marcus's military rank for the first time. "I contacted some friends at Fort Carson. Your reputation precedes you, sir." Marcus looked up from packing his rifle, his quiet demeanor unchanged despite being identified. "Just trying to stay sharp," he replied simply. The crowd overheard Mike's use of the military title and began connecting pieces of information they hadn't considered before. Marcus's shooting stance, his breathing technique, his methodical approach to each shot, and his extraordinary precision all suddenly made sense in a military context. Jake Morrison approached respectfully. "Sir, would you mind if I asked about your military service? What we just witnessed was beyond civilian-level marksmanship." Marcus finished packing his equipment before responding. The crowd waited patiently, recognizing they were in the presence of someone whose skills far exceeded anything they had previously encountered. "I served with some exceptional units over the years," Marcus said carefully. "Had the privilege of working with outstanding soldiers and learning from the best instructors the military has to offer." David Coomer, the police sniper, stepped forward.
Oh.
"Sir, I've trained with military snipers before, but I've never seen precision like this. Would you be willing to share any training insights that might help civilian shooters improve their accuracy?" Question opened an opportunity for Marcus to transition from mysterious marksman to mentor. Though he remained characteristically modest about his extraordinary abilities, the crowd sensed they were about to learn from someone whose experience went far beyond typical shooting instruction. Marcus looked around at the expectant faces, all genuine in their desire to learn from his demonstration. For the first time since arriving at the range, he seemed to consider sharing more than minimal responses to their questions. Marcus set his rifle case down and looked around at the group of serious shooters who had gathered to witness his demonstration. Their faces showed genuine respect and curiosity, not the dismissive attitudes they had displayed when he first arrived. "With his basic equipment, the fundamentals never change," Marcus began, his voice carrying more authority than before. "Breathing, sight alignment, trigger control, and follow-through. Everything else is just equipment." Jake Morrison pulled out a notebook, recognizing this as a rare opportunity to learn from someone with obviously exceptional training. "Sir, could you explain how you achieved that precision with such basic equipment?" "Most of us assumed expensive gear was necessary for that level of accuracy." Marcus gestured toward his simple rifle setup. "This weapon system is nearly identical. to what I used during multiple deployments, I became familiar with its capabilities under conditions much more challenging than a peaceful shooting range. The implications of his statement weren't lost on the experienced shooters present. They began to understand they had witnessed skills developed in combat situations, not competition ranges. Range Safety Officer Mike Patterson stepped forward. Colonel Thompson served with the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, he explained to the group. Delta Force has some of the most rigorous marksmanship training in the world. The revelation sent murmurs through the crowd. Delta Force was legendary among military and law enforcement communities for producing operators with extraordinary skills in multiple disciplines, including precision shooting under extreme conditions. I spent 15 years with various special operations units, Marcus confirmed. I had the honor of serving alongside incredible soldiers who taught me that equipment doesn't make the marksman. Training, discipline, and experience make the difference. Lisa Chen raised her hand respectfully. Sir, what's the longest shot you've made in actual operations? Marcus paused, considering how much operational detail he could appropriately share. Let's just say that 300 yards is considered close range in that world. We trained regularly at distances that would surprise most civilian shooters. David Kumar, the police sniper, asked about training methods. How often did you practice to maintain that level of precision? Daily when possible, Marcus replied. We practiced under stress conditions. Physical exhaustion, time pressure, environmental challenges, and simulated combat situations. Anyone can shoot well from a comfortable bench rest on a calm day. Tony Ritchie, who had been most skeptical earlier, approached with obvious embarrassment about his initial dismissive comments. Sir, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on your equipment rather than recognizing real skill. Marcus nodded. Graciously, no offense taken. I understand that expensive equipment often correlates with serious shooting, but the fundamentals matter more than the gear. The conversation continued for nearly an hour as Marcus shared training insights and answered questions about developing precision shooting skills. He emphasized mental discipline, consistent practice, and the importance of understanding ballistics and environmental factors. Several people asked about his transition from military service to civilian life. Marcus explained that he had retired from active duty 6 months earlier and was adjusting to a quieter lifestyle in Colorado. He had chosen the local shooting range to maintain his skills and enjoy the sport. Without the pressure of operational requirements, will you be shooting here regularly? Jake Morrison asked hopefully. I think we could all learn a great deal from training with someone of your experience. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him that day. I think I'd enjoy that. It's been a long time since I could just shoot for the pure enjoyment of the sport. The group began discussing possibilities for informal training sessions and knowledge sharing. Marcus's demonstration had transformed him from an object of skepticism to a respected mentor in the span of a few hours as the afternoon sun began to set. Casting long shadows across the range, Marcus prepared to leave. The other shooters thanked him repeatedly for the demonstration and the impromptu training session. Colonel Mike Patterson said as Marcus headed toward the exit, "You're welcome here any time. And if you're ever interested in helping with our marksmanship courses, we'd be honored to have your expertise." Marcus paused at the door, looking back at the group of shooters who had witnessed his quiet demonstration of extraordinary skill. They represented the civilian shooting community he was now part of. People who shared his appreciation for precision and discipline, even if they had never faced the challenges that had shaped his abilities. 3 months later, Marcus had become a regular fixture at precision shooting sports. His quiet demeanor and extraordinary skills had earned him respect throughout the local shooting community. What started as skepticism about his basic equipment had evolved into admiration for his abilities and appreciation for his willingness to share knowledge. The range had established informal weekend training sessions led by Marcus, focusing on fundamental marksmanship skills that civilian shooters rarely learned. These sessions were consistently overbooked, with shooters traveling from neighboring states to learn from the retired Delta Force operator, Jake. Morrison had become one of Marcus's most dedicated students. his expensive custom rifle remained unchanged, but his shooting technique had improved dramatically under Marcus's guidance. He could now achieve precision groups that had seemed impossible just months earlier. The equipment was never the limiting factor, Jake reflected during one training session. I was so focused on having the best gear that I neglected the fundamentals that actually matter. Lisa Chen had modified her competitive shooting approach based on Marcus's teachings about mental discipline and stress management. Her tournament scores had improved significantly, earning her recognition at regional competitions. She credited Marcus's emphasis on consistent fundamentals over equipment advantages. Tony Ritchie had become one of Marcus's strongest supporters, often referring customers at his gun shop to the weekend training sessions. He had learned to recognize genuine skill over flashy equipment, helping customers focus on developing abilities rather than just purchasing expensive accessories. David Coomer found that Marcus's military training methods enhanced his police sniper capabilities. Stress management techniques and environmental awareness skills proved valuable during tactical operations, making him more effective in his law enforcement role. Range Safety Officer Mike Patterson had convinced the range ownership to offer Marcus a part-time position as a marksmanship instructor. The arrangement allowed Marcus to earn income while sharing his expertise with civilian shooters who genuinely wanted to improve their skills. The transformation in attitudes extended beyond just the original group who witnessed Marcus's initial demonstration. Word had spread throughout the regional shooting community about the retired special operations soldier who taught precision shooting with basic equipment. Marcus found genuine satisfaction in helping civilian shooters achieve capabilities they hadn't believed possible. Teaching allowed him to use his military skills in a peaceful context, while building connections within his new community. The weekend training sessions had evolved into a supportive learning environment where experienced shooters helped beginners develop proper techniques. Marcus's emphasis on fundamentals over equipment had created a culture focused on skill development rather than gear acquisition. Several students had achieved remarkable improvements in their shooting precision. Marcus took pride in watching civilian shooters discover they could achieve accuracy they had previously thought required expensive custom equipment or exceptional natural talent. The shooting range had become a bridge between Marcus's military past and his civilian future. The skills that had been developed for combat operations now served to help others enjoy precision shooting as a sport and develop personal capabilities. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Marcusio was packing his equipment after a solo practice session when Jake Morrison approached with a thoughtful expression. "Colonel, I've been thinking about what you said the first day we met," Jake said. "It's about learning from good instructors over the years." We all learned something important that day about not judging capabilities by appearances. Marcus nodded, remembering the skeptical comments about his basic rifle setup. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from unexpected sources. I learned as much from watching civilian shooters approach the sport with passion as they learned from military training methods. As Marcus walked toward his truck, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that first afternoon at the range. The transition from military service to civilian life had been challenging, but sharing his skills with others had provided purpose and community connections he hadn't expected to find. The retired Delta Force sniper had discovered that precision shooting could build bridges between different worlds, connecting military experience with civilian interests through shared appreciation for skill, discipline, and continuous improvement. His basic rifle and quiet demeanor had opened doors to friendships and respect that expensive equipment never could have provided. The sun was setting behind the mountains as Marcus drove home, already planning the next weekend's training session, and thinking about the civilian shooters who would continue developing their capabilities long after his military career had ended.